lovely to be here. Lovely to be a part of the Strategy Connect community, and definitely in this session, which is a masterclass for project managers. I don't know how much we can call it a masterclass, but
Yeah.
we've had discussions before this session. We have experienced a lot of cases, a lot of projects as managers ourselves, and we figured we'd have more of an open conversation on that. And if that's something that people learn from, that's lovely. So, starting off with some introductions so that we know who's here. Maybe I'll start quickly about myself. I'm a freelance manager based in the United Arab Emirates. I focus on consumer goods and venture incubation. And before I was a freelancer, I spent over 5 to 6 years in Bain and Company. Now, I've been playing manager for the last around 3 years, typically leading teams of 5 to 10 associates. And I also run a consulting toolkit training program with a friend and a fellow BCG manager, Karima. And there too, we teach workshops and programs on how to be a good manager. So I figured I would join in this session because, of course, I've had the pleasure of being a manager to a few teams. I've had the pleasure of training people on how to be a manager. So I figured I could bring some of that to the table, and that's what I look forward to doing today. Let's talk to our panelists next. Maybe let's start with Fabiano. You could walk us quickly through your wealth of experience.
Absolutely. Thanks a ton, Ekta. So, good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Fabiano. I'm from Brazil. I'm a former BCG manager. I stayed with the company in Brazil and in Dubai for 8.5 years, and also spent a year and a half as a senior executive at a large ad tech company in Brazil. And since the middle of this year, I decided to found my own consulting boutique. And I'm currently the managing partner of this boutique, which focuses on high growth firms in Brazil and the Middle East. So again, very, very good to be here. Excited to share a bit of my experiences on the ground and learn from you all for sure.
Perfect. Thank you, Fabiano. Anurag, love to hear about you as well.
Oh, great. So, like, first of all, like you said, that I feel that this wouldn't be a master class, but we would really like to share our experiences and learn from each other. And I would really like that if we could talk more about the kind of experiences we've had, the kind of troubles everyone is facing, and probably just create some good practices around it. I happen to be working for more than 10 years now, and I've had an opportunity of leading some large teams, sometimes even up to a 400 member team, which was basically under a government project. So that is the kind of experience I hold. I've worked with brands like Ernst& Young. I've worked with PwC. Currently, at my role at XPN, also I'm responsible for initially basically onboarding a certain client, making sure that what is the kind of project guidelines that we have around it. And my focus is towards the North American European region. I happen to study from a couple of universities like MIP from Milan, Italy. I've had a course from Cornell. I did my master's from Gurgaon from a called School of Inspired Leadership, and I am an engineer by my basic education. So yeah, that's in a nutshell about me, and I would love to share more as we progress.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anurag. I can see we have a diverse set of experience here and from different parts of the globe. So I think we're going to have a lot of learning today. So let's get into the heat of it. Again, like Tanya said, please feel free to drop in any questions that you may have. I'm sure you had something in mind when you signed up for a 1 hour masterclass in being a manager. So if you have any sort of burning questions, do feel free to put it in the chat. But starting off with the basics, the three of us, along with Tanya, got onto a meeting a few weeks ago. And we're discussing what would we want to see if we were, playing manager soon or already in the heat of it and want to learn how to be a really good one. And part of what we realize is that there's really three components to it, right? The first one being how do you sort of plan the project, plan the core, which is the problem solving, work planning in order to deliver the project. Part of the role also seemed to be on how to lead teams, right? How to motivate your team, get the best out of your team, get the best quality answer out of your team while keeping them happy. And the third would also then be stakeholder management, as in looking outside. How do you make sure the client is happy? How do you make sure all of those sort of dynamics are smooth when the project is going on? So when you realize that there's so many building blocks, we figured we would each take one and then walk through our experiences of this. Let's start off with you, Fabiano, because I know we had a lot of discussions on problem solving and work planning, which, of course, you've had experience in. So maybe you could walk through what you think are your ideas of how to really do a good job as a manager in that aspect of the managerial role.
Sure, absolutely, Ekta. So I think in more broader terms, for me, problem solving is all about really like understanding what is exactly at stake in terms of like the key objectives of the case and how to tackle it. So sort of like I use it like as a working backwards type of thing. You know, there's actually a very famous book about it, written from some guys for I think they worked at Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. And to me, it's all about that. You know, you make sure that you understand what is your final destination, and then how we're going to get there. You know, which are the building blocks to get there. So yeah, I think it's really like making sure you understand like the core of it or the streamline of it before you dig deeper.
Fair enough. What about you, Anurag? What do you typically tend to do when you start sort of solving a problem, right? Or sort of figuring out how this project is going to be structured? Do you have
Well,
any sense of how do you set it up, how you define what kind of topics or areas you're handling? How do you
yeah.
go about
So the first thing that I go about is the first thing is I think framing or understanding the problem statement. Like just like Fabiano said, that we understand what are the priorities, how do we break it down, we define the key components. I make sure that I understand that what is the kind of stakeholder metrics that we need to create, what are the kind of risk, how where do we want to be. I think that's the most important question that we must ask. Where do we want to be in terms of our economics, in terms of our people, in terms of our processes, in terms of the knowledge bank that we create through the end of the project. And it's a complete journey. So that's what I look at, and I put down the real buckets. I make sure that these are the buckets that I need to approach, and then we start. Then we start from the onboarding, obviously. And yes, I think those are the key aspects.
Got it. Got it. That's interesting, right? And I think I definitely resonate with a lot of what both of you are saying. Personally, for me, one of the things that's really helped me when I start off on the problem solving journey or just sort of building out the work plan, knowing what the next 3, 4 months look like,
Right.
is to inject as much clarity as possible. Because as managers, we also realize there's so many work streams you can have, so many problems you can solve, but there's only this much amount of time, and you need to solve what matters the most for the client, right? So part of the toolkit that we used to learn and employ at Bain was the answer first or the hypothesis before the project, where really in the first 3 or 4 days of the project as the manager, my role would be to write down what the answer would look like, right? What was
Right.
the final deck at the end of the project look like? And of course, I could be completely wrong in some of the assumptions I make. But just as I write it down, it gives me a sense of, okay, what are the big topics I need to be handling, right? Now, this would, of course, be a brainstorming process with the lead partners on the case, with the main clients, and the idea of what they want out of the project with my workstream leads. But at the end of the day, I would make sure that within, say, the third day or fourth day of the project, there is a big document with what looks like an outline for the final deck, the final deliverable, so that we know, guys, this is what we're gunning for, right? And I think that clarity, the second that comes in the case, it suddenly feels a lot less stressful, which is what I used to feel my earlier days as a manager. Do you tend to employ such tools as well, or do you typically tend to sort of break down the problem in a different way? I'd love to hear how you go about it, Fabiano, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. So in my case, yes, I do. I do consider that. Honestly, I think it's I don't know. I wouldn't add much. I think it's just really, really what I do, honestly.
Fantastic. I think one of the discussions we were also having was that alongside the answer, what kind of tools do we then use in order to make sure that we work plan efficiently? To be honest, I think AI has been a real game changer for me. Works like a rubber duck plus plus almost, right? Because I put in my thoughts, my deepest darkest secrets, but more really my sort of emerging thoughts on the industry, or ask it questions that I would imagine are a little too dumb to ask experts. And I find that using Bard as sort of, or ChatGPT as a sparring partner in order to develop that hypothesis really sort of helps me get to the major buckets in the problem statement. Do you guys tend to use any tools when you're doing this whole problem solving or work planning part of team management?
Right. So I'd like to take that up. If that's okay.
Yeah,
Uh, so what happens is that I've always worked into this concept where I see that a learning from a particular industry happens to be very useful in another industries as well.
absolutely.
So I usually look for a similar set of problems in probably another field, which is already facing a similar kind of problem. And the problem could be related to anything. It could be related to the resources. It could be related to the abundance of, you can say, subscribers. It could be about how do we manage that kind of trend? How could we manage that kind of traffic inflow? Sometimes it's all about reachability. Sometimes it's all about market penetration. So I understand that, okay, what is the kind of problem statement? Then I look out for, I especially try to run my brain towards different fields. Like I'll go and see, okay, how did retail solve it out? How did this solve it out? So that is one. Second is I try to change the geography,
Mhm.
and that usually brings a lot of you can say learning, a lot of insights around it. Then obviously, like, we go through the traditional frameworks like we all do in our consulting fields, where we do the Moscow analysis, we do the SWOT analysis, we do n number of analysis where we just break down the kind of requirements. We understand it, okay, these are the most primary and most important problems for us to solve. Then, just like you said, that we want to plot it out, that okay, this is the kind of scenario we want to create. And it goes through a lot of different processes. Like, even if I want to have a better communication channel with my client, the first part is to actually interact, actually make sure that there are regular meetups, and first program it, define it, that okay, these are the days we are going to meet, these are the days we are going to talk, and then eventually it becomes a habit. It's like your casual coffee catch-ups or your scrums and other kind of things. And then you, and not all of the points you always happen to just ask about that, okay, these are the benchmarks and these are the things that we're doing about it. Sometimes you just tend to ask the feel of it as well. So you understand that how people are engaged, how actively engaged they are, what are they willing to do, what are the things. Sometimes the feedback also comes from the ground, because the people who are there in that setting and we are alien to it, we usually enter and we try to break them, make it a project. Those people already have some ideas which have been they've been waiting to implement.
Yeah.
So that's how I prepare the ground before I proceed. And yes, AI.
No, absolutely. I think I do resonate with that, right? One of the things that a senior partner I used to work with told us is that, of course, you're bringing this value as a third party observer, or a new entrant into the organization. But there are so many people who have ideas, they just don't have the platform that you do as a
Correct.
consultant, right? So a lot of times, like I said, when I'm doing the initial answer first, or what the answer looks like at the end of the deck, I'm building out that hypothesis. I tend to have these freewheeling conversations with some of the lead clients, where I do have a questionnaire. It is small and simple, but I'm very comfortable veering off track because I really want to see what's on top of their mind, right? As opposed to guiding them towards a couple of areas, I kind of let the conversation be loose and say, okay, we're trying to solve this. I'm not going to give you ideas. What would you do if you were in my place? What would you
Right.
suggest? Right. And of course, what then happens is that there's this age old comment of, the consultant tells you the time by looking at your watch, um, which is funny. But, if you need to know the time, someone should be looking at the watch, and happy to do that for you if you're not. But in order to avoid that kind of a situation, I think what's also really helpful is to then champion the people who are bringing these ideas up, right? Because you have a platform with the CEO, you have a platform with the CMO or the CFO. You tell them, hey, your team has this fantastic employee. He has this idea. I've helped him structure it a little bit. I've helped him sort of flesh it out into like a couple of pages, but I think we can have a solid discussion on it, and it's all his brainchild, right? I think sort of championing people and bringing out those innovative thinkers within the organization can also be really useful thing to do as a consultant and help solve the answer. It need not be you in a silo work planning by yourself, figuring out the answer by yourself, but often sort of setting this up very early on in the project can mean everyone's happy about it and nobody feels like she's coming and doing my job or doing what I'm supposed to do. So I found that to be a lot more pleasant. Have you had similar experiences where you kind of use this to bring the client into the problem solving?
Yeah, if I can take that one,
Yeah,
actually, I think that's I think there's a ton of richness in doing that. I feel that in many situations we do see the client as really like I mean, pretty much in all situations, the client is really like the expert on the field and actually like the person holding the majority of the knowledge there. So leveraging that is really important, especially if you talk to different people in different departments. So listening to these diverse perspectives for me is really like what takes a good solution into an excellent solution, into an excellent recommendation. So I think that having that is really powerful, but it's not easy to do. You need to have time for sure to listen to all the stakeholders, and you need to be keen to take those perspectives. Because what I see sometimes is that people go on and talk to people, but they're not really like listening, and they are not really like absorbing what the other person is telling them. They're just like checking the box that, well, I talked to people A, I talked to person A, I talked to person B. So really using that actively into your solution, into the solution that you are co-creating as a team, is super powerful, if you will.
Right.
absolutely, absolutely. Anurag, you had something to say?
Yeah, I was thinking like what Fabiano said. It's actually pretty right because a lot of times we tend to listen and but we don't tend to absorb it. And it's very important because see, we don't just have to plan the project. We actually have to end up executing it as well. And what I feel that having that level of empathy, having that level of you can say active listening and engaging with the audience there and the setting there, it helps you drive your project as well because you tend to break that ice, you tend to break those inhibitions while you progress through it. And in some of the problems, they happen to come from some diplomatic problems where people are not able to take it to their superior. Sometimes they're not able to frame it well. So a lot of semi-constructed ideas happen to be there in that space, and the external eye helps us build it up from scratch.
Absolutely. I see a comment from Pratish in the chat where he says he starts with what are the client's burning issues and what are we solving for. I think that's absolutely on point. One thing I'd love to add here though is there's sometimes what the client thinks their burning issues are and what the actual burning issues are, which you would hope are the same thing, but sometimes they're not what the client wants to solve and get you on board for, and what the reality of the situation is, are two very different things. And sometimes even the word the client is very fungible, right? There's something that could be good for the organization, but there's also something that would be good for the person in front of you, right? What are the vested interests of the person who got you onto the project? Is he gunning for a promotion? Did he just get onto the organization last month and he wants to make like a big splash? All of these are questions, because I absolutely love the idea of looking for the client's burning questions, but I think it's worth also spending time on figuring out who exactly is the client here and what are the burning issues I'm willing to solve, I think I'm going to solve. Fabiano, you're nodding. You seem to have had experiences where the client asked you to do something and you realized the situation was something completely different.
Yeah, well, that happened many times, and I think what you're saying is exactly the key, So really going beyond the transactionality, if you will, so really getting to know the person in detail, understanding their backgrounds and especially what are their interests and their agendas within the company is really key to really understand why they're positioning a certain topic and why they're suggesting to go in a specific direction, So and I mean, especially if you're talking about a remote setting, I'm as I said, I'm based out of Brazil, so in many cases when we are working in the Middle East, we are doing remote work. So going beyond transactional, it's a bit harder. So you need to have that actively on your mind. So really like take the time to have like a random talk at the beginning of the conversations, at the beginning of the meetings, really getting to know the people on the other side. It's super important, and then naturally you go from there, so bring people again closer, so whenever you hear their opinions, it's very unlikely that people have simply a completely irrational perspective. They just tend to have a different perspective on things, so getting to understand their perspectives and then understanding how they connect to your stream of work, to your objectives is really in my opinion, really what unlocks the next. What unlocks the progress on the case.
Absolutely. And I think this is a very nice segue into this one of the segments that we discussed, moving on from problem solving and work planning into stakeholder management, right? This is a lot of people. This is a people business. You would think it's about PowerPoints, but it's really not. We could do the job even on bullet points handwritten on a piece of paper, but it's about convincing the one person or the many people on the other side, making them happy, making them feel like there was something that was done and resulting in a good project, right? Maybe Anurag, I could ask you to sort of speak to us a little bit about what stakeholder management means for you in a project, because I know you were taking point on this.
Okay, so from my personal experiences, I would say stakeholder management is the most important thing because a lot of times we tend to focus on the problems and we understand that, okay, this new engagement is coming in. We start working on it, but we realize that it might not just be initiated from within the system. Sometimes it also happens that you have to comply outside. So I'll give you a real life example towards it. And a while ago, I was involved in this exercise called the Data Governance Quality Index. And it was a big exercise that the government had planned, where they had planned it for all the ministries across India. There are 52 ministries, by the way, and they were assessing. And it was very much there in the public. It was very much there in the open, and ministries were basically assigned scores on the way they handle data. And when you talk about handling data, it comes in n number of forms. So it is about data, you can say warehousing. How do you capture data? How do you capture it from different sources? How do you perform analysis on it? How do you store it? What are your archiving policies? What are your privacy policies? At which junctions do you expose it to external systems? At which junctions do you keep it internal and you to the type of keep an encryption over it, or you anonymize it? Then it was also about driving correlation. How can you help other ministries in driving that particular initiative of theirs? And how can you utilize data from another ministries while guaranteeing the privacy of all the citizens? So it was a huge exercise, like people can read about it in the news as well. And the problem that we realized that, so now when you are actively engaged with a certain ministry, it happens that every ministry has its own journey. Some of them were formed back in 1970, some of them were newly formed in 2000s. And all of them are at a different stage of experience. Some started directly with computers and some had old records with paper, right? So, and obviously, like when this happens, you will have the people of higher position, of long legacies, and people who have spent a lot of time in that particular ecosystem within those ministries. So it became a very important point for us, that how do you bring people who have had an experience of copying or basically registering people on a register, and then making a copy of it and then digitizing it somewhere 10 years ago. And now they've been asked to that now you have to go to directly to data analytics and you have to simply draw inferences out of it. In the other scenario, the newer ministries, they happen to respond very well to it because they started from a digitized method of data collection and everything. So now the problem came in that how do we manage the stakeholders? So we defined that, okay, what are the buckets? How do we bucket the different ministries? How can we bucket different set of stakeholders? How many of them are there to respond? How many of them understand? How many of them actually need education? That, okay, why this initiative has been drawn? So there's a lot of acceptance that needs to be driven. So there are a lot of power dynamics, a lot of people who do not want to probably go from one and they feel that, okay, this is just one off measure and it will pass on. So there are people of every kind in any close setting. Sometimes they're very open, sometimes they are very resistant that, okay, I'm probably going to retire in a couple of years. Why do I need to engage myself with this? So how it was very important that how do we bucket it down? We decided to create small wins for it. That, okay, whenever you have that engaging conversation, the first thing is that it's not easy to get every stakeholder on board in a certain set of meeting. So how do you prioritize? How do you make sure that the message percolates in the best manner and in the fastest manner? And then you define the motivators and the wins for each stakeholder. You also come up with some kind of inferences, some kind of you can say insights that, okay, according to the external study that I have conducted, this is how it is going to benefit your department. Then probably coming up with some basic hand holding, like, okay, these are the ways in which you're going to engage with the X team or Y team. Then obviously converting the bigger stakeholders or the older ones or the you can say the more powerful ones, because that creates a buy-in for everyone else. So yeah, these are some of the ways where how we handled the stakeholders and we brought them on to the same platform.
Wow, that sounds like quite the mega project. So very impressive, Anurag. And I'm
Yeah.
glad you were able to sort of. I think that's uh, one of the special things about being a consultant is being able to be a part of a variety of projects. And I think there are some projects that really teach you specific skills. You know, like I have that one project back in my analyst years, which I hold completely responsible for teaching me Excel. Right? Like no course could have taught me Excel as well as that one project did. I feel like this is your project for stakeholder management, right? Like once you do this, everything else is a cakewalk, really, because you've been tested, it looks like. But it sounds like a fantastic way to handle it. I'd also love to hear from you, Fabiano. And I think it's also interesting because you tend to straddle two geographical regions. So you may also end up seeing clients who are very different from each other. And you'd have seen it, you'd have recognized it, and perhaps you've developed a way to be able to be a great consultant to both. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so I mean, there are indeed different regions for sure, but I think there are more similarities than the differences. To be honest, I think everything that we talked about, like really going beyond or building up the relationships is really powerful, and not only in Brazil and in the Middle East, but I think in across all the regions that I've worked on in my career, and really like getting to the nuances as we said, understanding the backgrounds and agendas is really important, and I think that even like using this as a step to talk about the different geographies. I would go with what Anurag said in terms of like leveraging what you learn in one topic to the rest, because I feel that a significant portion of what we do as management consultants is all about connecting the dots, So as you said in the past, many times you go and talk to clients, they already know the solutions, and we are just like connecting the dots. I think the same applies across industries and across geographies. We are always connecting the dots. We're always bringing topics from one industry to a completely different industry, and so on and so forth. So I think that it's really a powerful way to do things, and in the end, I think that working in different geographies just amplifies it. Amplifies on one side the need to build deeper relationships and amplify the opportunities to leverage these different insights that you might have from different industries.
Absolutely, and I mean, I completely relate to what you're saying in terms of connecting the dots, right? I think, of course, um, clients bring us in to solve problems, but if they were to give us 100% clarity, that would become a whole project in itself, right? So often clients are not super equipped to give you 100% clarity. You need to kind of meet different people, understand the way they speak, the things that they want to tell you, connect the dots, and find out what they really want you to do. Scoping is not necessarily a strong suit for them because their day-to-day job is something completely different. It's not to make your life easier; it's to make their own lives easier. So you're going to have to bring that clarity for yourself, and that means interacting with a wide variety of people and understanding what they want. This also reminds me of one of the practices I was taught early on as a manager, and now I sort of teach it to my teams, or I end up using it in our trainings as well. Um, just before a project starts, or when a project has started, often what we do is we do have a discussion, a leadership discussion with the senior and junior partners on just the kind of people whom we're speaking to, right? There's of course the harder or the more tangible things of what is this person's designation, what is technically like when are they getting promoted or what are their vested interests. But there's also a discussion on the softer aspects of things like, is this person an extrovert? Are they an introvert? Do they like speaking on Zoom calls? Do they like speaking in person? Do they like WhatsApping? Like, which way does this person seem to really shine? Right now, if there were a meeting happening or a big steering committee happening, would this person prefer to be pre-wired through a few small decks or a short email, or would they want to actually sit with you and discuss the whole thing before the steering committee? Like, in what way would they actually enjoy being a part of the final committee? And these are discussions, not really hard facts, but just more softer observations that maybe the partners made when they've been interacting with this client, right? Often I like to take this to the next level also if I end up working for a client where I know there are other people in the organization from, say, my business school or my former organizations, because I will reach out to them and I will ask about this person or the kind of people that I'm going to be interacting with. It's kind of it's a little bit of detective work, really, but it pays off, I would say, during a project, right? Mentioning the things that they may like mention. For example, there was one person who went to the same business school as me, and he loved talking about our business school. And I would bring it up because he really liked speaking to a junior who would come out from the organization 20 years later, and it seemed to improve his mood every single time, right? Just small things like this, I think, really make a big difference. So, I think from a lot from what we said, there's the harder facts of what they may want out of the job, out of the project, but there's also the softer aspects of what kind of conversations would they like to have with you? How would they happily sort of engage with you? If they're a morning person, let's schedule the call in the morning. If they're an evening person, let's schedule the call in the evening. As simple as
Yes.
that. I think these small observations make a lot more than I thought it would when I started consulting. But for now I think this is the game changer, right? It truly is.
Right.
Um, yeah, and I think there was another thing that we were discussing when we discussed stakeholder management. We did also, this is when things are going well, but there's also points in time things are not going so well, and there are conflicts of interest, and there's negative dynamics between one client map to the other. Have you either of you been in situations where you face this, right? Where there's a slightly hostile environment on the client side, and you're kind of getting caught in the crossfire?
Right. Right. Fabian, would you like to take it or should I?
Yeah, feel free.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'll probably talk about it since I happen to engage in such you can say such scenario. So a lot of time, like we say that, like someone even mentioned, I think Pratish mentioned that it's about the change management strategy, and it's always the change that people is resisting, but it happens to be that it's the only constant that you have to align yourself to. And I think that's where the most of the problems they come in. And that's the reason, like what we try to do is that whenever we are framing a project, we after the onboarding and everything is done, what we try to do is we try to put people in different buckets. Like we identify that, okay, like first thing is obviously we identify there's a thing called critical path. We've all learned in our bookish project management as well, where we understand that, okay, what are the key factors that are going to delay the project or put the task behind or by a certain time. So we understand the critical path. We understand that who are the critical stakeholders aligned to it. And just like Akshata said, that you trying to understand their habits, you trying to understand their modes of communication, you break it down. And the conflict handling is finding the commonality. So what happens is that we try to come up with all those you can say outcomes of the project, where we define that, okay, these outcomes are good for you. So rather than them engaging in the other things of basically pulling you out of one reason or another, you tend to bring out the commonality and the common aspects that, okay, these are the goals which are common to both of you. And see, obviously, as an engagement person, you cannot just simply say that, okay, you must not raise this point and you must not raise this point. But what is important is to catch people when they're at their best. And it's better to bring them together on the common agenda that they both want to drive. And then we slowly slide in that, okay, these are the some of, you can say, alterations or some of the accommodations that the respective departments have to make. And usually, I see that people tend to be driven more by the good things that they're seeing in the future. So when they say that, okay, these number of people will be free for me, this is the kind of saving I'm going to make in my department, this is the kind of efficiency it is going to drive. And we try to find common occasions where we also have, say, an additional third person, because the reputation is also important for individuals when they are mostly you can say in a state of conflict. So that's what we do. And what we also do is that we create a monitoring framework as well. So we make sure that how do we monitor it, how do we monitor the complete transition, and how did we bring that problem. So usually the people who are raising that conflict or increasing that conflict, they are very much appeased with that thought that, okay, yes, yes, all these things are taken care of, and they are much more informed. We move them accordingly in the RACI metrics as well, that, okay, yes, this is how the stakeholders are moving, and we tend to improvise while we are at it. So yeah, some of the things that have worked for me. Not sure how what Fabiano does or what Akshita has done, but yeah, this is what I've seen.
What about you?
Yeah, yeah, I would say exactly the same, Anurag. I think the only thing I would add is that, I mean, conflict of interest or resistance to change, if you will, is just a natural thing. I think for me, it was a bit complicated, but matter of fact, I mean, perhaps unfortunately, that happens. People do have a bias to stick to what they're doing and do have a bias to stick to their own opinions and their own agendas. So understanding that will be the case regardless, and understanding uh, after that what is exactly going on, if it's just like the classic resistance or if there's a case specific resistance, is really key to then unlock the things and move forward on the conflicts that we might see.
Absolutely, and I agree with both of you as well. I used to have an associate partner who used to say that we act as therapists for our clients sometimes, and I think that's a good role to kind of play, in the sense that if they want to vent or if they're having a lot of issues in their work environment and they feel comfortable enough to talk to you about it, then lend a ear, hear them out, be the person who listens to them. Of course, do sort of try to understand how much of that is actually their input into the project and how much of it is just them venting and not something that they want to sort of let the rest of the world know. And I think most importantly, what I was advised to do, and I think what makes a lot of sense, is to not then take sides, or or really kind of
Yeah,
pick one over the other. It's uh, the organization has to function smoothly, right? And it needs to function smoothly even after you leave. You're not going to be in that organization forever.
right.
And so it's in their best interest for them to figure it out on their own, for them to sort of not burn bridges with each other. But it's definitely not in their interest to have this external party just kind of come in, mess everything up and walk away. So I think it's important to listen, but maybe not be very clear that I'm listening to you, I understand, but then not taking that one step further and saying, I promise I will help you out. I assure, things will get done your way because it may not be in your hands and it's really not a good idea.
Yeah.
But I think this is really interesting, and I think I'm as we speak, I'm realizing just how much of a people business this is, right? Especially as you become a manager, which is so different from being an associate. When an associate, you're building your slides, you're building your Excels, you kind of solving the problem from an academic perspective. You have some client interaction, but it's not as people intensive as the manager role is. The manager role is really all Zoom calls, right, on your calendar if you're working remotely. It's just people all the time.
Right.
But I think one big aspect of people, which we may cover and which brings us to the last segment, is our teams, right? How do we handle our teams? How do we manage, which is really the crux of the role. So I think I'd love to talk a little bit about how I do it. Now, typically when I am managing my teams, I really have two goals that I give to myself, right? Now, one is I want to bring out the best in my team. I want them to have a great time and everyone to perform like they want to, like they can, to bring out the best really, and for them to have a lot of fun. And the second objective is for the case to get solved, right? For the team to work as a well-oiled machine and for the answer to actually get solved. So it's both the journey being really fun and really sort of useful for my team, and the destination, which is the deliverable, being one of the best deliverables we could have come across. So in most of my manager role, I've found, is me juggling these two things: keeping my team happy, keeping the answer going, keeping the team happy, keeping the answer going, and that's pretty much how my entire day goes. As far as it comes to keeping my team happy, I think a couple of things that have really worked for me, I would say, one is acknowledging different working styles. I've had people who really love chatting before they come up with an answer, who love brainstorming, and I have people who absolutely do not want to speak to me until they have the slides ready. Right? They love working in their little cabin, and I think whatever works, right, for them. As a manager, you don't impose your working style. You kind of say, okay, I'm going to work the way it works best for you. I think what's then also useful, which is another tool I employ, is a lot of feedback and professional development chats, because you may not necessarily always get signals and like mild suggestions during the workday. You would rather just have it all out in the open in terms of what um, what do you want to do with your career, and therefore how can I help you on this project, right? This also means if you have anything that they may want to improve on, or that you want them to continue doing, you can tell them in your regularly scheduled feedback chats, maybe just like 25-30 minutes once every 2 or 3 weeks. I make it a point, there's a block in my calendar set up whenever a project starts, and I make it a point that they convey any feedback that I have to them, and that they convey any feedback they have to me, so that it's not a shock at the end of the project that, hey, I thought you didn't do this really well. So I think those two things are really important from managing the team and keeping them happy. From the perspective of then making sure that the answer is sort of as good as it can be, I make sure that the operating model of the team is very very clean and set up in a way that it works towards the key dates in the project, which is the steering committee or any sort of specific client interactions, right? So I make sure there are morning catch-up set up. I make sure there are evening catch-up set up. I make sure there are case team meetings where we discuss the project as a whole. I make sure there are sessions set up where one work stream is speaking about what they did, so that the other work stream knows, so that nobody's in the blind about what's going on in the project. I also make sure there are sort of industry knowledge sessions from experts in the organization, or a great podcast that someone found, or a senior partner who knows a lot about the industry, who can just talk to us about it so that we don't have to go hunting on Google for what that industry is about.
Right.
And that way, you really formalize a lot of learning. You take the entire team on the journey of of making sure there are clear cut sessions, deadlines, formal blocks in place so that they know what they're working towards and therefore the answer is as good as it can be. Of course, this is a scattered set of tools, really my favorite ones, but I'd love to hear from you guys on how you kind of make sure you're bringing out the best in the people that you're working with. Maybe we start with you, Fabiano.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, so again, I don't know. I think I'm being repetitive, but that's really the key for me. I think you're really to the point, actually, whenever you said that this is the people business, and I do think that way. I think whenever you are dealing with your team, man, get to know your team. Sit down with them and again, really nurture that relationship. And whenever you're done with that, I think the next step is to really understand what exactly you're putting them, what challenges you're putting in front of them, and how can you help them. On one side, naturally you need to be closer to the more junior individuals in your team. But at the same time, I think, and this applies to all of the team members, you need to have a very structured approach to feedbacks and to the development of that person in a specific. And I think it's always a combination of being super specific and what worked and what has not worked, and being very structured into covering the topics in detail and in a sort of like um, formal manner, if you will. Maybe not formal, but really like indeed a structured way. So I think whenever you do those things collectively, you understand who's in front of you again, and what are the gaps that they need to fill. Then I think that's when you make sure that the team is actually running smoothly.
Absolutely. Anurag?
Well, from my point of view, like a lot of things what Fabiano said, like you have to, because it's a people business, like I said, till the time we don't deploy everything to the AIs and we hold them accountable for making the mistakes, I think it's all about the people, and it's going to stay that way. And in my experience as well, like I also feel that transparency is what brings the team closer at any point of time. And more than transparency, I think it's a one-to-one relationship that you create as a product manager. Like for me, when I was there at with 400 people, I know it was not possible for me. But then you try to do as much as you can, like isolate a time of your day, even if it is 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and try to talk to a new person within your project. I think that's what I've done. Like it could be simply asking how their day is, simply ask them about what they're learning on the project is, simply asking about, okay, what is motivating you? What is the next thing that you want to do? It brings out a lot of answers for you. And in terms of my planning, like what I try to do is I try to use these open boards. Like you might have heard about these tools called like Trello, or the agile boards like Kanban boards, Jira. So when we utilize these tools, the tools this helps a lot. So the more you can say grassroots level breakdown we can do of any problem, and ultimately every individual in the team knows that okay, this is what I want to, this is what I'm supposed to do, and it's very much clear. Like it helps us basically manage their off timings and on timings as well. Like sometimes people want to work in the morning, some people like to work in the daytime. And if you have a Kanban board, it's in front of you. You know what are your to dos. You know what are the things. And then we add an additional one usually. How we do that is we also add that okay, to do internally. So where problems like, okay, for something we might not have a resource at that point of time, for something we might need additional training, for something we might need additional case studies or external help. And I think that helps a lot. Then I make sure that whenever a project is being executed, then you try to document the learnings, document the key things that you discovered in that particular phase, which you may feel that okay, these will not be available very easily online, or usually these are the proprietary documents that are prepared for by the companies, and they will not stay with you, they will be in those closed ecosystems. So you tend to document such things, you tend to create databases around it, that okay, these are the best practices, these are the things, so that whenever people come in and move in or move out, they know that okay, where from where do they have to pick up. And usually this keeps the team in a very light manner in their brains, and they tend to focus more on the things that they have to do rather than carry a baggage that okay, today I have to deal with this also in addition to my work. So yeah, that's how I think the happy team is the most efficient team, I feel.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
and if I may add, I think Anurag and I were thinking about like the specifics of the team, but also like if we take one step, it's like one step back, and really understand the scope of the things that we're doing. I mean, consulting work really it's usually something that it's related to big projects, really like large investments. You're talking about billions. You're talking about in many cases hundreds of millions and something of the sort. So giving that perspective to the team is really important. I think it's critical to for them to understand or to really like make it tangible for them that I mean this is big. It
Right.
has a big impact. And this is really like transformational, if you will. So really making sure that you have that perspective fresh out in your team's mind, for me, is really like key to have sort of like the foundations of your team's motivation. Then on you go on about building the things that we talked about in the session.
Absolutely. I think that perspective is really important, right? And I think that also gives a sense of how important the work that uh, we do is, and why the deadlines are as sacrosanct as they are, why the clients seem to
Exactly.
want to talk like in 1 week or in 2 days because
Right.
they have a lot going on at their end, right? And it's millions and billions of dollars at stake. So we need to get to the best answer we can. I think there's an interesting question on the chat that also slightly relates to this. Haninder asked, how can a manager solve for a gap in certain expertise within the team when it's required to solve a problem or a case? I would actually raise you one up on that and say almost every case has us lacking expertise, right? Because we're entering industries that we typically don't know. I mean, right now I'm working on something related to shipping ports. And, I have not gone to a port or know how ships operate. And I definitely lack the expertise. I think there's two things, right? I think one is when you give your team the context of how important this is, and therefore how we as consultants have access to the right people and to a certain amount of decent budget in order to get the answers, that actually empowers the team to go out and get that expertise. Right now, say I need to code something on Python or R, right? I could spend 4 days and do it myself, or I could hire someone and get it done in like 1 day. And that really depends upon, okay, what are the other things I have on my plate and what kind of expertise is required and what kind of budget do I have. But when your team knows that, I often find that this is not a manager role anymore. You've given agency to your team to figure it out, right? The answer needs to be the answer. Now, whether you go and hire someone to make it happen or you learn it yourself will depend upon the level of agency you've been given as a work stream lead in my case, right? This is the amount of money we have to play with, and there's like $50 million on the line. Now decide whether you want to figure this out by doing something yourself or hiring someone else. I think often also in a lot of cases it's really important as a manager to tell your team, unlike an academic assignment where you would go to the library and figure everything out ourselves, in a business that's as fast paced as this, you have to be a little witty when it comes to solving things, right? Call up that batchmate who works in the same industry, or that uncle who used to do something in this space before. Or, use Google intelligently to find the right report so that you don't have to like do 20 expert calls to figure this out. I think a lot of times you need to, the perspective that Fabiano was speaking about, the second you give that perspective to the team, they're also told, listen, this is not an academic exercise that you're tested on so that you do work over 10 or 20 days. You be intelligent about it, get quick answers, may not be perfect, but good enough. When I freelance for a larger consulting firm, often it's the case that I use money to make the problem go away.
Exactly. I mean, again, 100%. I wouldn't change a single word of what you said, actually. I think that's really the case. Yeah.
Got it. Um, there's a couple of other questions as well. Pritish asks, how do we best manage a client when you discover that you underestimated the effort required? So the discovery of additional complications, and there is a cost implication. The client refuses to accept the additional cost. Um, Anurag, maybe you could take that. Have you had such experiences?
Yeah, all the times. This is like this happens with every time, and usually it happens that at the time of onboarding, people are very excited that okay, yes, this is going to be taken care of, and they tend to miss out the details. And I think a lot of what happens in this situation lies basically is connected to what happens when we do at the time of planning. And at this point of time, I think you have to have a hard skin. You have to have a stronger communication with the client as well, because see, the kind of delivery is as important for the client as it is for you.
Mhm.
And if we have the right set of documentation, if we have the right set of agreements over the kind of requirements that we had and the kind of fine tune or the grades, sometime in some, like, you cannot have a right answer to it. In some cases you have to absorb the cost, in some cases you have to basically tell them that okay, this falls out of the purview. So I think that's what we need to do, and we have to be very strong in this such a scenario.
Absolutely. Perfect. So I think we're on top of the hour, and then that brings us to close of what was a really interesting discussion. Thank you guys so much for taking out the time. It was a lovely time speaking with you. Just kind of understanding that a lot of our journeys as managers are a lot more similar than we than we think it is, really. But also, there's so many sort of tips and tricks people have developed to handle their time as a manager. And thank you everyone who's attended the session as well. I think it's been a great set, great set of people, great questions.